When people lose the connection between their actions and their consequences, they lose their hold on reality, and the further this goes, the more it looks like madness. The human mind is wired for immediacy. It's natural for us to discount the future and get swept up in the moment, in the present, and lose sight of the bigger picture, causing us to make poor decisions and prioritize the wrong things. By looking at ourselves and where we are through the lens of time and through various different angles, we can get a more complete glimpse of reality. As Robert Greene says, the firmer your grasp on reality, the more power you will have to alter it for your purposes. To begin, I want you to join me for a quick thought experiment where you can enter your mind and see what an expanded perspective looks like. I want you to think of a moment a few months ago, maybe 3 months ago, that had a strong emotional impact on you. Perhaps it was something that really upset you, or perhaps it was something that really excited you. Think of how you feel those emotions today, now that months have passed. Think about how those emotions have lost a lot of their strength, if you even feel them at all. Perhaps you feel nothing anymore. Notice how the fidelity of the memory has faded. Now I want you to go a little bit further back. I want you to go about a year back and take another moment that had emotional significance to you. You'll notice that the emotional salience of that moment has faded even more, and the further back we go, the more the emotional salience of those events fades. Finally, let's go back several years, maybe 5 or 10 even. Think of an experience that had a very deep emotional impact on you. Perhaps a breakup or losing a job. Looking back, it's almost certain that you feel practically nothing in comparison to how you felt in that moment. Notice how much the way you look at those moments changes with time. How in that moment, maybe you felt that it was one of the most important things in your life. You thought you would never get over it, or that it was going to last forever, that it was a very, very big deal. But now looking back, you realize that it was only one period out of many. Perhaps you even look back and you think to yourself, man, I thought that was such a big deal, but it's actually kind of funny. Now I can tell it as a story. It doesn't matter. Maybe I lost that job, but now I have a better one. Where would I have been without it? What would have happened to me if I wouldn't have gotten out of that relationship? You now have a perspective radically different from the one you had then. You have the perspective and clarity of hindsight. Now let's alter the experiment a little bit. Take a problem you're presently dealing with. It might also be a decision that has a strong emotional component that you're grappling with at the moment. Imagine what it would be like 2 months out, and imagine it deeply. Think to yourself truly, what would you in 2 months be thinking about this? How would you feel? How would the emotions have faded? Think long and hard about this. Really try to simulate the future as best you can. Now take that same decision or problem and move 6 months into the future and look back from 6 months in the future and think to yourself, what would this decision really be like? Do the same thing a year out into the future, and perhaps even 2 to 5 years out. What will your perspective look like a few years from now? Maybe with that distance, you'll look back and think to yourself that you were being a bit rash and that you were getting overwhelmed and overblowing this, frankly, minor problem. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't so big a deal. Maybe you'll even look back and laugh, thinking to yourself, I can't believe I got so caught up in that problem. I thought it was such a big deal, but it really wasn't. Maybe, however, you look back and you realize that was an important thing. That is something that I should focus on right now so that in the future, I don't regret making the wrong decisions. This will give you a better sense of your priorities and which of those priorities will endure over time. Now let's talk about how you can apply this perspective to make your decisions better. Firstly, it is imperative that you detach yourself from your current emotions. Whenever you're emotional, you become immediately more irrational. Whether those emotions are positive or negative, even the high of a win can cause you to make poor decisions and to overestimate your abilities. Try to avoid making decisions until you're in a position of emotional sobriety, where you can use your rational faculties to their fullest capacity. From that place of emotional sobriety and rationality, it is critical to analyze potential consequences. So you want to take not only the consequences of your actions, but also the consequences of those consequences, and then the consequences of those, and so on. The more important the issue, the further order consequences you have to take into account. A rather amusing story about this took place in 19th century India, where British colonial rulers wanted to decrease the amount of venomous cobras that were roaming the streets of Delhi. So they put a price on their heads. They told the Indian citizens that For every dead body of the cobras that they brought in, they would pay them. So, of course, some enterprising and ingenious Indian citizens began to breed the cobras and bring them in and make a living off of them. Unfortunately for those crafty Indians, the British rulers quickly caught on and canceled the reward scheme. And so, in retribution, the Indian citizens released the cobras that they had bred out onto the streets, thus tripling the population of venomous cobras in Delhi. You have to beware of second, third, and perhaps even further order consequences when you're making any sort of decision, especially if it's an important decision, lest you end up like the unfortunate British colonial rulers. There's a lot of trivia that you have to avoid when making decisions and when attempting to look out into the future. There are a lot of trivial details that can get in your way and hinder your progress. Two useful ways of countering getting lost in trivia like that is firstly to have a clearly defined hierarchy of priorities. You have to know exactly what you want to get out of your actions. And not only that, but a sort of hierarchy of prioritization, a hierarchy of value. So what's the most important thing? What are the secondary most important things? What are the tertiary most important things? And then finally, what isn't important? Whatever isn't important should be immediately discarded. Likewise, it is useful to broaden your temporal horizon. If you attempt to zoom out and see the bigger picture, you'll notice that a lot of things that you do don't actually matter. And most of the things you do are a waste of time. You can use the thought experiment previously mentioned to broaden your temporal horizons, but also look at it from the perspective of your full lifespan, from the present all the way until your death. You'll notice that most of your actions are irrelevant. Most of the things you focus on and spend a lot of time on are, frankly, pointless. You have to carefully scrutinize all that is irrelevant and then discard it, ignore it. Whatever happens with it doesn't matter because it is an irrelevant detail. The next thing you can do to broaden your perspective is actually one that I haven't heard Robert Greene talk about, but I've heard Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger talk about it extensively, and I thought it was important enough to mention in the video. Imagine that you have a map in your head, a mental map of reality. Reality, unfortunately, is extremely complex. There are far too many details for any mind to hold. The Darwinian solution for this for most animals is just to have instincts, to crudely map reality onto their nervous systems. But we have a more elegant solution. We can create in our heads these maps of reality. Now, a map is a simplified representation of the territory being the reality itself, and then the map being the representation in our heads. Imagine you're walking through a town. You're trying to get to the train station. You're about to be late. The train is going to leave. So you need to get from your hotel to the train station as fast as you can. So you need a map. Imagine you pull a map out of your pocket and you unfold it and you keep unfolding it and you keep unfolding it and you keep unfolding it. And you have this massive map, rich with detail, representing with perfect fidelity at a 1-to-1 scale the town. At that point, the map is useless because the map is just as complicated to navigate as the town itself. You have every single detail. You're just going to get lost looking at the map. The way that map would be useful is if it omitted all unnecessary details, if it kept only the most relevant things. The map isn't going to have every street sign and every person and every little bike rack or something. It's only going to have the streets and the buildings. That way you can look at the map, pinpoint the train station, and then follow the roads to where you are. The maps in our heads are built by the information we acquire, and that can be anything as simple as raw sensory information that you're getting from looking at this screen right now, all the way to something as complex as mastering an academic discipline. We build our predictions of the future off of the information we have acquired in the past. For example, imagine the French city of Dijon. Imagine it in your head. What does it look like? If you're anything like me, you're imagining something much like Paris. I've been to Paris. I've never been to Dijon, but I imagine that Dijon would look a lot like Paris. If you've never been to Paris, you're likely imagining something like the images you would see online or in movies. If you've ever seen pictures of French cities, you probably are somewhat correct. Your prediction of what Dijon looks like is probably at least partially accurate. This is because that map in your head serves as an excellent prediction machine. The specific information each of us has acquired alters the way we see the new things we encounter. Let's take human behavior, for example. An evolutionary biologist will look at this behavior through the lens of adaptation and selection. A psychoanalyst will look at it through the lens of unconscious desires. A Skinnerian behaviorist will look at it through the lens of reward and punishment, or operant conditioning, and a neuroscientist will look at it through the lens of action potentials and neurochemicals. The thing is, they're all right. they're all looking at these behaviors through things that cause them. But the thing is, each of those perspectives is just one brush stroke of the big picture. Charlie Munger talks often about multidisciplinarity, the idea of learning from various disciplines, having a strong breadth of knowledge, and a foundation in all the major academic disciplines. So that way, when you look at the world, you can look at it from all these different angles and get a much fuller perspective. Likewise, it's useful to remember that in every decision, you only ever have at your disposal one perspective, and that perspective is yours. It is useful to attempt to look through the lenses of others, of their perspectives. So for one, you could study the thoughts of others, the thoughts of great minds. You could read books or watch videos or listen to podcasts with people who have thought very deeply on a subject or studied a subject deeply. You can see the way they look at issues and see how it differs from yours and use that to make your perspective more accurate. And you can also have another person look at this issue with you from their unique perspective. So it's useful to have other people give feedback or give ideas because their minds are operating rather differently from yours because your mental maps are both quite different. And that's because the information you've both acquired over your entire lifespans is very different. That's why we all see things so differently. It's because what we see is built on the entirety of the information we've acquired throughout our entire lifespan. The thing is, we can see ourselves in an extremely distorted way, and we do this in our decisions and our actions as well. It's not just how we look at ourselves. So it's useful to seek out the perspectives of others to ensure that we are seeing things as clearly as we can. Expand your relationship with time. See your life as a totality. Expand your mental map to look at things from as many angles as possible and get the clearest, fullest picture you can. And seek the perspectives of other minds. And perhaps you will be less short-sighted. If you found this video useful, I think you'll benefit from one of these videos. Thank you for watching.